Welcome to Field Talk, a Monitor Farm Scotland podcast. Join our host, Wallace Curry, as he explores the stories from Monitor Farm networks on how farmers have adapted their businesses with support from specialists and experts to assess farm performance and explore opportunities. Monitor Farm Scotland is farmer-led, farmer-driven, encouraging discussion and solution-based thinking.
Welcome back, everyone, to Field Talk, the Monitor Farm podcast. Today is the second last episode of this series, which is both fun and sad. First series is all focused on those 9 farmers around the country, and this second series is really sort of focused on, I guess, different technology that's been trialled, maybe some projects that are being run through the programme, as today will as well. Today, we're sort of looking at ruminating on technology. So is smaXtec changing beef herd health? And if that doesn't mean anything to you, do not worry. We will be covering all of that as we go. We've got two people on the call today. We have Helen Hollingsworth, who works with smaXtec, which we'll come to as we go. And we have Ewan Jamieson of Meadows Vets, and we'll introduce both of them as we go. We'll sort of hear their story from both sides, as with, I guess, a tie to the Monitor Farm podcast. Guys, just before we sort of kick these off, it's always good to hear about the people on the podcast before we consider even what you do and whatnot. Just Ewan, because you're first on my screen, just give us a wee bit of background as to who Ewan Jamieson is.
So I'm a director at Meadows Vets. We're based out of O'Melgrim in New Deer in Aberdeenshire here. I graduated from Glasgow in 2011, started for Meadows a few weeks later, or a month or two later, and I've been here ever since, really. We cover a great mix. We're mixed practice. We cover all species, but we do my work and ours predominantly with cattle and sheep. A bit of dairy work, but an awful lot of sucklers, a lot of store cattle, a lot of finishing units, and a fair few sheep flocks as well. And it's I just really enjoy it. It's great to be out and about in Aberdeenshire, meeting farmers, working with farmers, and we work with it's a nice area to work in.
Is Meadows one practice, Ewan, or is there a few?
Yeah, no, we're one practice with 2 sites. So, like I say, one in O'Melgrim, one site in O'Melgrim, one site in New Deer, which, between the 2 sites, we cover a fair portion of sort of eastern Aberdeenshire. And we're independent, which means we're not part of any conglomerate. We get to make our own decisions. We get to do things the way that we want to, which is we feel the best way to do things anyway.
Oh, I can imagine it would be. I assume all the same rules have to be met, but it's that sort of slight lack of restriction will be a wee bit easier, I can only imagine. What about yourself, Helen?
Yes, I've been, I left school and worked on dairy farms for a while, and then I qualified as a veterinary nurse. And then in 2016 came across smaXtec, which just made an amazing amount of sense to me as a really cool way to monitor cows. So it was really interesting to have gone through that process of actually working with cows, from a sort of on-farm point of view, and then as a veterinary nurse, but then to now use a technology in them that helps to monitor their health and so on. It's just been amazing, really.
And I think a pretty good place to start for this episode for those listening, Helen, is what is it? What is the smaXtec bolus?
It's a rumen bolus, so it's you administer it like you would any other mineral or worming bolus with an applicator gun, and it just sits inside the reticulum of the cow. So one of those 4 stomachs that they have, which it's almost like it was designed for the bolus. So, and then it's got an accelerometer and a thermometer inside it, which monitors heats. So when they're bulling, calving, but most importantly, probably for us, is health. So it's telling us when those cows are getting sick, either with a fever, so something like mastitis and so on, or a metabolic disorder like ketosis and milk fever. And there's just a wealth of information we can get from the bolus sitting inside the cow.
And you sort of touched on it there, but how does it do that? What's it picking up on? What are the sort of indicators for that bolus to give that information?
Yeah, it's got an accelerometer, which is much like you would have on your phone. So it's monitoring activity and the behavior of the animal. And then it's also got a thermometer as well. And just from those devices that are inside the bolus, we've been able to build these algorithms to tell, what the cow is doing, whether she's her activity has changed considerably from normal, that her temperature has changed, and that the thing I love about that thermometer is because it's inside that cow at a really crucial point. You're getting really accurate readings. But the other thing we can do from those devices inside that bolus is we can see when the cow's drinking, so drinking bouts, but how often and how much she's drinking. So that's really from the cow taking the water in and it hitting the reticulum, that coldness, it's how long it stays cold for and how much. And then from what we can also monitor her rumination as well. So when a cow, when she eats, you get 2 spasms in the gut, but then when she ruminates, so brings that cud up, you get 3. And it's that we're monitoring. And we're literally monitoring that 24/7 for as long as that bolus is inside the cow.
So there's still a hint of human interaction. It's not just this gives data and exactly what it is. You can sort of look at that, and that could be one of a few things. Is that right?
Yeah, very much so. We do have we've got a true device which will indicate if the system believes it's mastitis, and if it believes it's ketosis, and if it thinks it's milk fever. So those will come up as an advisory for the customer to say, right, this is what we're guiding you towards, so have a look. But also there's a big part of it that the customer support side of smaXtec does, where we show the farmers how to interpret the graphs and actually see what other illnesses we're picking up. So for instance, a displaced abomasum, or something, maybe Lyme's disease, things like that, because we get very different patterns on the graph. So it's all about that learning process for them and how we can support them doing that, really.
And just one more quick thing on that. How you said, was it 2016 you said you joined, is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
How has that technology changed in what's almost a decade? I assume massively.
You can't believe how much. When I first got involved with the system, we'd call it the SX1 bolus, which was the first one, really. That just monitored activity and temperature. We didn't have rumination. We couldn't see the water intake, and the range was only about 30 meters from the bolus to the base station. That now it has evolved into a completely different animal, and we can now read data for up to 300 meters away, sometimes more. But also all those things I mentioned just now, the rumination, the water intake, and so on. And it's never ending. smaXtec is constantly thinking, right, what's the next thing we can be monitoring? And so, just a small, for instance, there would be that a pregnant cow, when she's getting close towards the end of her gestation, so within 3 weeks, we've started to notice that if the cow's carrying a very large calf or twins, we see a massive increase in activity, and the system will say increased activity, and it makes the farmer look at her and think, oh, okay, maybe I'm going to have to deal with her in a different way. So, that side of things is just amazing, really.
That's a phenomenal piece of information that we probably haven't really had access to.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Ewan, this is the Monitor Farm podcast. You're in Aberdeenshire and working alongside the Banff and the Buchan Monitor Farms, I believe. Is that right?
So we work quite closely with Bruce up at Stockentry. We have done for about a couple of years now. So we came in when he was already part of the Monitor Farm project, and it's great because it gives you an opportunity to try things. Bruce, especially at Stockentry, he's so keen, he's so willing to take on this sort of thing and to look at it and to try it and to give things a fair trial as well. We're testing the technology there. We're not just adopting it and that's that. We're really trying to push it and see what it can do and with other projects as well. So we wanted farms in general, I suppose, but they're some of our best clients. The way we want to try things, they want to interact with you and take you on and do these sorts of projects. So it's been a great experience so far.
I've mentioned it a couple of times on the podcast with Bruce. he just made out like he wasn't trying anything. And then we went through the episode, and I'm like, man, like, have you got time for this? Yeah, I love that sort of openness to just try, even if you don't know if it's going to work, and that's the interesting thing about trialing. Helen obviously does know it's going to work, but that sort of that openness to try, that's great. But what are we seeing, Ewan, from a what's the word, I guess? I guess from a herd performance perspective, what are we what are we seeing smaXtec play a role in?
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, I suppose there's three areas that we would really, want to be looking at with it, and maybe Helen will jump in and chat about some of them as well. But the main areas where we were looking at this, and we looked at, me and Bruce discussed a couple of systems when he was looking at getting technology for monitoring cattle, and we decided the smaXtec was a pretty good fit. And the things we were looking at is one is the health is obviously a huge thing. There's the calvings and having a way to monitor calvings, because you're not standing looking at the cows all the time. There's an awful lot of other things going on. And then there's fertility is another big aspect of it. And we're striving for efficiency. We're trying to get every cow and calf that we can. And so having a way to monitor the fertility of these cows, other than just standing in your field watching them, is a huge benefit. And so, we've been going through the summer here, and the bulls have been out with the cows for a wee while, and the fertility side of things is huge. What we can do is we can watch to see if the bulls are getting cows and calf. We can watch the heats and make sure the cows aren't coming back in heat after they've been served. But even before the point that the bulls go in, we can do what we call reference heats, and we can check that the cows are actually cycling ready for the bull, and we can start picking out cows that aren't cycling. And then I can, as a vet, I can come and examine them and find out why. It might be that they've got infection. It might be that they've got cysts on their ovaries, and we can treat those. Because without this kind of technology, you would find that kind of cows, in the back end after the bulls have come out. You'd PD the cow and say, "Oh, it's never had a chance of getting in calf." But if we'd done something, if we'd identified that and done something with that months ago, we could have had a calf in there. So the fertility side is one of the big aspects that we're looking at. But the health, as Helen says, the health's a huge thing, and it's that idea of early intervention. This is hopefully going to give us early alerts of when things are unwell and when there's problems, and allow us to treat them much quicker and much more successfully.
And there's focus there on both health from a veterinary perspective is obviously beneficial, but from the whole system with this product at the heart of it, you're saving money. It sounds like sort of from a labor perspective, from a health done well, it's going to save you money. That's going to be a cost saving, but also it seems like there's a massive welfare benefit here as well. Would that be fair to say, Ewan?
Yeah, I'd say so. I'd say so, and it's all wrapped up together. The labor thing, the time thing, the health thing. And there's hardly most farms to suckler herds. That's part of multiple enterprises on the farm, and you're not standing watching these cows all the time. But with a bolus in, there is something monitoring these cows all the time, and these alerts come through. And so, if you're going to get alerts to things that you haven't even noticed yet, you're going to get that early intervention. And with any disease, the earlier you pick it up, the earlier you treat it, the quicker it is to get it better. Less drugs, less medicine to improve things. The cow's sick for less time, so she's going to get back on track a lot quicker. So yeah, the potential welfare benefits are really huge. Absolutely.
From a business perspective, Helen, that there's when you're selling these things, animal welfare is imperative. It's very important. It's going to be quite high on a farmer's list, but we also have to consider this a business. How does this work in line from a business perspective? We've sort of touched on it there, but from you guys' side.
Well, a very interesting point would be that around calving time, when we're giving those calving alerts, it's not only letting the farmer know that actually the cow is going to be calving, but it's giving him a time scale. So usually when they get the alert for calving, the calf should be born within 6 to 18 hours. And we always advise them, if it's got to 20 hours, put your hand in, find out what's going on. And I know that on Bruce's farm in particular, around calving time, he did have an issue with a cow, and luckily he knew she was going to be calving because he'd had that alert, put the hand in, found out that the calf was coming backwards, and they could do an assisted birth then. So those sorts of things, you're saving not only the calf's life, but potentially the cow as well. So there's a massive cost saving there. So just, knowing that around calving time is massive. But then the other thing that was really interesting when we put the boluses in these cows, because the whole point of it was these cows are mostly outside. So we wanted to be able to monitor them outside and see that they do everything as naturally as possible, but that you can be there if needed. But we actually found something very interesting with the feeding side of things, in that the cows weren't taking enough food on board to store calcium. So they were actually then a bit calcium deficient, which was meaning that they were not really set up for the calving event. So we were able to, with the help of the nutritionists and speaking to Ewan as well, to adjust the way they were being fed. And that made a really big difference, because then we were noticing that they calved in well, and they weren't having problems afterwards as well. So there were no real signs of milk fever and what have you. So that all those things put together massively, save money, and also that whole sort of work-life balance, it meant that Bruce he knew what cows were going to be calving, and he knew that sometimes he could take a bit of a break because there wasn't an alert that had come through. So yeah, very good.
Being able to take a break at calving should be your selling point.
Well, I've worked with some customers who literally are on their own at calving time, and if they're block calving, it's a very stressful time. So knowing that the times when they can actually take a bit of a break from that, and then there's not a cow that's going to calve in the next sort of 12 hours or so, is massive for them.
How accurate is that, Helen? You're saying nothing's going to calve for X hours, whatever that is.
Yeah.
I assume sometimes that's not perfect, and that's not a bad thing. That's a genuine question. How accurate is that?
It is very accurate. There are factors that will affect it, and certainly we found that this is on Bruce's farm. If you don't have a correct due date, so for instance, you didn't know when the cow actually had an insemination and a heat, you are doing a bit of guesswork. So that means that you might not get such accurate data. But essentially, what happens with every mammal, is that the temperature drops by about half a degree 36 hours before they give birth. Any in that time frame. So when we give that alert, we've factored in really that the cow's building up to it. We're monitoring her temperature literally every minute of the day. So when we see that temperature starting to drop, then we can send the alert to say, okay, temperature's dropped. The calf sent a message to say it's ready to be born. And then that, as I say, we have to give it a bit of a range, because every cow will be different. Some will calve fairly quickly, much like they would in the human world. And then others will take a little bit longer about it. And actually, it's those ones that take a bit longer that we want to concentrate on and say, okay, well, they've had a longer labour process. They're going to need a little bit more aftercare, really. So
I get the impression this question is going to be one of those ones that's a bit stupid, but we're going to ask anyway. Is all of this information accessible on the farm, or does that need to go through smaXtec? Right, okay, so the farmer can access that.
Yeah, so basically every customer has an app on their phone, and they also have the data coming through on a website as well. And any number of people can have access to that data. So for instance, on Bruce's farm, Ewan's got access, his nutritionist has got access, all his farm workers have as well as us. So they're monitoring their farm, but also we're helping in the background as well. So if he misses something, sometimes we pick it up and we'll alert him to it as well.
And one thing that I'm going to ask both of you, just because we were chatting at the minute, Helen, I'll ask you first and pass on to Ewan, but one of the big things that we're trying to reduce across livestock is antibiotic use for various reasons, be that business, be that health, be that public health, whatever. I'm led to believe this can reduce the requirement for antibiotic use. Is that right?
Yeah, definitely. So again, it's about that early detection. So because we're monitoring the temperature, that means you can intervene a lot sooner. So for instance, a case of mastitis, we'd probably be up to about 3 or 4 days before you'd get really visual signs. So it alerts the customers, say, look, we think this is a mastitis case, please check the udder. They check it, and they can do a California milk test, which is quite a simple test to do, to see if there's any change in consistency of the milk. And if there's even the slightest change, then they would use an anti-inflammatory, maybe some udder mint, but not using antibiotics. And 9 times out of 10, that cow doesn't need to have antibiotics. The nice thing is once you've treated her, you then see the response on the graph, and if everything's settling back to normal, then you can leave well alone. If things are progressing and you're getting more temperatures and so on, then you need to go down the next step and maybe use some antibiotics. But and in some cases, analyzing the milk to find out what pathogen you're dealing with. Yeah, it's a really good tool for that.
It just seems across the board that in everything, be that calving, be that heat, be that whatever, be that disease, anything, it's just that early detection and that early information a day or 6 hours before you would normally get it, and you can then do the right thing before you've missed the chance that you would normally miss.
Absolutely. Yeah.
From a veterinary perspective, Ewan, how valuable is that?
Yeah, no, I just completely agree. And just second what Helen was saying there, it's about early detection, and when you can compare the beef and the dairy, sticking with mastitis, the dairy farmers pick up mastitis because they're milking the cows twice a day. They pick it up the day, within hours of it happening. We have very good treatment rates. In the beef sector, traditionally, mastitis, as Helen said, you're picking it up 2, 3, 4 days after it started. It's got a really big hold. I mean, in a lot of cases, you cannot cure mastitis. You can stop it progressing, but you cannot cure it. So your cure rates are actually pretty low, and you need an awful lot of antibiotics, to save the life of that cow. But if you're getting early alerts, you're detecting that really quickly, then you can treat it either without antibiotics or with very little antibiotics, for just a day or two's treatment instead of weeks of treatment. And then that feeds back to the welfare thing as well. You get it back healthy really quickly. But your antibiotic use definitely is much lower. And then you can zoom out a bit and look big picture. Anything that's going to improve the health across the herd, going back to the monitoring of nutrition and things like that. Anything that's going to give you alerts with the herd in general is struggling with be it temperature or be it the diet. That's going to have knock-on effects for disease, which you then may need to treat with antibiotics. So it's in the big picture, as well as focusing on individual animals, we should see an improvement.
I mean, the very nature of the job of veterinary, Ewan, is almost to put yourself out of the job learned long term, making sure those animals are healthy and whatnot. And obviously we don't want you to have a job, but with a focus on this type of technology, it's in its infancy in some ways, but we're also quite far in. It's that sort of that duality there because it's so fast developing. But with a focus on your work with farmers that are utilising it and focus on the Monitor Farm here, are you seeing farmers sort of make those informed decisions more themselves and reduce that reliance on the likes of yourself or nutritionists, but still utilising, I understand, but reducing that reliance, or is that been quite similar throughout?
Yeah, no, you're absolutely right. And the vet's main job, I think when you graduate as a vet, you just love racing out to farms and calving cows and treating sick things. But as you go on, you realise that being a good farm vet is about never having to go to a farm. It's being able to work with farmers and prevent problems and prevent all the hassle and the problems and that sort of thing. And this definitely fits into that. And it's new technology in the beef farms, and I think a lot of folk are still learning about it and on their farmers, and we've not gone to a stage yet where we're just so hands off, we're not need to do anything. And smaXtec isn't going to solve every problem, because an awful lot of it is on management and is on breed selection and building design, and there's so much that fits into that. But it is a good tool for that, and I think as Bruce and other farmers with the technology learn more about it, at the minute I think we're at the stage that we are, we're looking at the technology, and so we're discussing between myself, other vets, nutritionists, Helen, we're having these discussions. Look at this. What's this mean? How will we respond to this? And so we'll take that forward in the future. And as you say, you know, as time goes on, Bruce will look at his results on the screen and go, oh yeah, we've discussed this sort of thing. We know what this is about. We can handle it ourselves. But you know, having that backup from different folk like from smaXtec and Helen, and being able to show those results to other professionals is a bonus.
I think that's the whole thing. I don't really believe in silver bullets for anything. You know, I think people see a new piece of tech, and I work for UK Agri Tech Centre, and with that, people come to you, and someone literally come up to us at Groundswell and told us what their farm situation was, and says, how can you make this work perfectly? And I'm like, I don't think that exists. Yeah, I don't think that's a thing. And the reason I'm saying this is smaXtec's not going to operate as a silver bullet. It's a quiver in that arsenal of holistic management across your whole farm, isn't it? And I'm very impressed with what we're talking about here. And one thing I wanted to ask, probably I think yourself, Ewan, be interesting to hear from Helen as well. Heat detection is one of those ever challenging topics, isn't it? You're never going to be as good as a bull, but how much is this assisting in heat detection?
Yeah, I mean, you're right, and going back to what you're saying about silver bullets, and it's you know, I think that's an interesting point, because you know, a lot people often look into technology like this, they get it, and then they think, great, I can just stare at my phone all day, and that's it. It's going to tell me all the answers. I don't need to do anything. But I think a valuable point that we have learned is that you still need to look at the cows, you know, and you still need to be looking at them and on the farm and seeing what's going on there. The app and the bolus, as good as it is, isn't going to give you all the answers. But then also the opposite is true as well. You know, when the bolus is telling you something, you need to respond to that, and you need to do something about it. And it can be easy to maybe ignore things which you know, it's there. You've put it in. You've got to listen to it. But on the heat side, I mean, there's lots of technology now that can tell you about heats, and I'd say that's really strong. You know, and dealing with smaXtec, I would say it is pretty good. You know, and that's if you're using AI, you know, you're going to rely on that to tell you when they're in heat, and I think it can even give you a wee window of when's the best time to AI that cow. But if your sucklers are running with the bull, one of the biggest advantages is you're going to see if that bull's working. And I mean, we recently reviewed bulls that we've tested, and of the bulls we tested in the last couple of years, there would be about 600 of them, and 12.5% of them were either infertile or subfertile, which is a lot of bulls on farms not working. And if that bull's in your field with your cows, you'll get an early alert on that with the smaXtec boluses, because you'll see them coming back in heat again after being served. So that's a big thing. I think that was one of the big attractions for Bruce at the time when we were looking at this sort of thing.
What sort of, this is unrelated to smaXtec, but a random question. What percent would you be looking for? To be unfair, I mean 0, obviously. But what would be an acceptable what would be an acceptable sort of across the board number?
I don't know. I mean,
Yeah.
we looked at that we counted it up about 5 years ago, and we were at 8%, and now in the last 2 years we're at 12.5%, and it'll be very interesting going forward to look at it in another few years. And I don't think it's an increasing number. I think it's probably just a blip in the statistics. You know, it'll hover up and down probably. But you know, if you're thinking 1 in 10 bulls on farm is not working as well as it should, I would say that's too many. You know, there's no doubt about it, that's too many. And if it's your bull that's not working, then it's a disaster. So I wouldn't like to put a figure on what's acceptable, because as you say, none.
I mean, 12.5, that's 1 in 8, isn't it? That's a lot.
Yeah, absolutely. And a lot of those bulls will leave some calves. But to be honest, that's sometimes nearly as bad as no calves at all, because if it's getting, you know, half of them in calf when it should, your calving's going to just drag on and on and on and on, you know, and you can you know, you can compensate for that sort of problems without the technology, but you probably should still do by rotating bulls and things like that, you know, age old things which folk have been doing for years. But it's great to get that early alert. You know, when you see your first cows getting served, and then 3 weeks later, if the smaXtec bolus is telling you that's the first cow, second cow, third cow repeated, even if the fourth cow held, you might be thinking, right, you know, we need to lift these bulls, and you're only 3 weeks in. compared to quite often, because people aren't staring at the cows being rolled all day, every day, you can easily miss it. And folk might be 7, 8, 9, 10 weeks into a bulling period, or you don't even know until we come to PD one, and you've missed it. You've missed your chance altogether. So it's I would say that is a big bonus of this kind of technology.
Yeah, definitely. It's got to be. It's got to be. And I guess a question for you, Helen. Someone might be listening to this thinking, "Oh, I'm quite interested in this, and maybe want to try it." What would be the first step? First off, how would they get involved? And then once that sort of process has been kicked off, how does that application of smaXtec begin?
Well, the first stage is usually for us to actually visit the farm, because we need to know what the layout is. So we use base stations to monitor the boluses, and it's really important that we have enough on the farm to be able to monitor the cows in whatever area they're in. And certainly on Bruce's farm, we did find, that there were areas we needed to cover better. So we put an extra base station in. And as it happens at the moment, he's running 3 groups. So he's got mobile base stations that take them to monitor the cows out in that group. So checking what the layout is and how they work. So are the cows indoors? Are they outdoors? What sort of equipment they need, how many cows they want to bolus. They sometimes don't want to do all of them, but I can tell you pretty quickly, once they've put them in some, they put them in the rest, because it just makes life a whole lot easier. So then once we've decided that, there obviously have been grants available, so the customers might decide to try and apply for the grant for those sort of that sort of equipment. But otherwise, we just go through the whole sales process of providing a quote. And then once they've agreed and gone ahead, we then fix a day for the installation. What we have to do first of all is load up all the cows' data onto smaXtec. So that's an important part of the process, because that allows us to be able to assign that bolus to that cow when we put it in her. And then once that's happened, we make sure that they've got full access, they've got their apps downloaded, they've got it loaded on their computer and so on. And then literally from that moment on, we're hand holding until they feel confident in using the system and are doing well with it. Some customers need loads of hand holding and some don't need so much. So we just tailor it to each farm, really.
And I think one big thing about this that'll, I assume, be a fear for everyone, so it's good to cover. We've even got a minister here in Scotland focusing on rural connectivity. How much is connectivity a part of it? Is Wi-Fi required? I assume it's obviously going to be required for the app, but is Wi-Fi required for the actual base station? What's required for the whole thing?
The base station itself can work off of a roaming SIM card, which is the most common way we do it, but it could be hardwired into via an Ethernet connection to your router if needed. So that sort of works autonomously on its own. The boluses have a battery inside them, which lasts about 5 years, and that constantly sends the data every half an hour to the base station and so on. So then, yes, it's just normal mobile signal is required for your phone and your computer, in internet connection if you've got it. But I've got a lot of customers that don't even look at a computer. Everything's done on their app. So long as they've got some sort of mobile signal, then the data's there all the time for them.
And with a focus on, a lot of herds in Scotland will be relatively extensive. You've got that sort of 300 meter range at the minute. Is there work to try and extend that and have this an extensive herd? Yeah, for sure. That's the goal.
Yeah. We're constantly looking at how we can improve things. And the biggest factor is actually the bolus being inside the cow, because that flesh and bone and so on does reduce the range quite a lot. If you had the device externally, you can read from much further away. So it's just how we can get through that and how we can improve that. And I don't think we'll ever stand still on that one. I think there'll always be something in the pipeline trying to improve the range. So yeah.
Always important to ask about cost. How much does it cost to use smaXtec?
Well, if we were taking a basic starter package just as a retail price, we charge 5,500 for the initial setup, which is all the equipment and so on. We have, again, depending on the farm, we might have additional base stations, but they're charged at considerably less, usually about 2,900 for a base station. The boluses are £30 each, so we've deliberately kept them on the cheaper side because we're aware that when a cow gets sent off farm for whatever reason, sold or culled, that bolus, you can't, obviously take it out and put it in another one. So we kept that as lower price as we could on that one. There's an installation cost, which is our time to come and set it all up, which is £800. And then there's a monthly monitoring fee. Now that does depend a little bit on the size of the herd. For instance, on Bruce's herd, it's £2.50 per cow per month. And that pays for all the software updates. So, there's no hidden extras then. It pays for the cost of the SIM cards in the base stations, all our time supporting and so on. So that monthly monitoring fee really is that whole package of keeping that farm running.
And it really trying to jump back to my lecturing days here to remember the exact role of reticulum, but it gathers that sort of foreign object, if a cow somehow eats a bit of alkaline pipe or a nail or whatever. But when it's holding that bolus, does that ever cause any issues for the cow? Is there things that have to be done from a veterinary perspective, or is general that sitting in fine? And also, does the bolus ever break?
No, the bolus. So the bolus, once it's in there, sits really nicely in the reticulum, and it's weighted so that it stays down there. You usually, once it's in there, I mean, I've gone to the abattoirs to see what the reticulum looks like after having boluses in, and there's just been genuinely no change at all. It's quite nicely made in that it's nice and rounded, so there's nothing sharp or anything like that. And we use human grade plastic, so that like they do for hips and knees and so on. So there's no risk of it breaking once it's in the cow. But we'd never advise reusing a bolus for similar reasons, because if you did get any defect in it at all, it's got a lithium ion battery, and so you wouldn't want to be risking any problems with that. What we see on the app and the web is if the bolus goes offline and it's unexpected, so she's still in range but it's not working, we can then have a look at it behind the scenes and see if the battery has gone wrong or whether something else has gone wrong with that bolus. And then we do a lifetime warranty on the bolus. So if that happens, we replace that free of charge for the life of that cow. So that cow might end up with more than 2 or 3 boluses in her lifetime. But it means that she's continuously being monitored. So yeah, we monitor for things going wrong like that, and just replace them as needed.
And now this question runs in line with the sort of range that the product can work with. But is there goals for this to work in sheep, or is this more of a cattle focus?
We do get asked that an awful lot, but there's years have gone into developing this bolus. I'm never going to say never, but it would have to be considerably smaller for a start, and that you might compromise on the battery life. Not maybe so important for sheep because they have a terrible habit of just turning their feet up in the air, but it'll be a cost thing really. There's a big difference between the cost of a sheep compared to a cow, but yeah, it would be a lovely thing to be able to do, but I can't see it just in the near future.
And we've focused on beef here, Helen, and that is beef, lamb, and specially selected pork is the target of QMS, which works alongside the Monitor Farm program. But is this also being utilised in dairy farms as well?
Yeah. That was what originally the system was developed for, was the dairy industry, and of course the health side of it is massive for them. And the good thing is, once you've got that bolus in, you've got that traceability, so you always know the history of that animal from the minute that bolus went in. So yes, it is big in the dairy industry, but of course the beef and the suckler guys heard about it. And if you think about it, the only difference between a suckler and beef herd compared to dairy is that you don't have a milking parlour, but you do have a calf. So that cow still needs to produce milk, she still needs to work, and she still needs to stay healthy and get back in calf. So it's a very, it's not that much different. It's just the way we monitor them is exactly the same. There are going to be certain differences, and we are hoping to, as time goes on, focus on the beef and the suckler guys and find out what their unique things are that they need, and then tailor the system maybe a bit more towards that.
With the very virtue of that parlour, as you say, Helen, you've got that sort of stationary place that all the cows are going to be within much less than a 300 metre radius, and often at least 180 days of the year, in most cases, they're going to be within 300 metres anyway. You know, it's primarily shed-based systems in a lot of places. Is there an unpredictability, maybe a lack of routine that comes with the beef systems over the dairy systems that you find from a smaXtec perspective, or is it pretty able to cope with that?
No, I'd say definitely it's more unpredictable, whether it's dairy or beef. If they're outside, it's much more difficult to monitor them all the time, because of course they could go just slightly out of range, for whatever reason. Maybe the shape of the field is such that there are areas there'd be blind spots and so on. So it is trickier. I think that's where it becomes very important that we do these farm visits and make sure that there aren't problems like that occurring. But there are also ways to mitigate that as well. So you can provide feeders or water troughs that mean the cows come in or stay in range better. The bolus will store 5 days of data anyway. So if that cow was out of range for a day or so, as soon as she comes back in range, it'll download that last 5 days of data. But if we're wanting to be live and knowing if there's any, risk of illness and things like that, then yes, it is important to get as much monitoring equipment around there to be sort of looking at them all the time. But it is a challenge, and that was really what the whole exercise of at Sockentry Farm with Bruce was. We wanted to take a beef herd that did have this challenge of being outside all the time. How are we going to monitor them? And it's really important that we work alongside the farmer and say, look, your battery has stopped working for that solar unit, you need to get it working again. So there is a big onus on them to look after the equipment and make sure it's doing its job. But also we try and help them out as well as we can, and just sort of say, did you notice that base station's offline or what have you?
In an episode we filmed recently, I talked about 15 years from now being 2040, which was sickening. But let's jump forward 10 or 15 years, Helen. Where would you like smaXtec to be? What would you like the offering to be, and how much more do you think it'd be doing? It's been a very accelerative rise, very quick. Can that continue at that pace, or is that got to level off somewhat?
It definitely can. I mean, they obviously won't tell me about some of the things that are upcoming because I've got a big mouth and I talk about it. So, but we have an amazing development team, and they are constantly. I think the only limitation is what we can think of next, really, that we want to monitor. Yes, we want to improve the range side of things, and also be even better at advising what illnesses they are. So as we get more and more data back from the farmers and the cows and the boluses, we'll be able to, predict better what we're dealing with inside them. But my honest feeling is that the way forward is going to be boluses in cows, whether it's smaXtec or another company, because once that bolus is in there, you don't have to interfere with it. It just does its job. It does it very accurately. If the bolus says there's something wrong with that animal, there is, so it's very cut and dried from that point of view. I just think that the way I see it is that we'll just carry on providing more and more information, improve the range, and really just make farmers' lives even easier. As Ewan said earlier, this is a tool in the toolbox. Nothing can take away from good stockmanship. However, it's about that work-life balance. And if you know that you've got something else keeping an eye on your cows, that you can just take your mind off it a bit and go and combine the field or whatever it is, it's just, I see that it's just going to make farming better, more enjoyable, and easier for farmers, really.
And Ewan, what would your thoughts on that be? The next decade, 15 years, whatever. what things are you seeing that you think smaXtec's capable of that you'd quite like to see, or is it ticking the boxes for you at the minute?
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, as you were discussing there, it's come from the dairy side. There's a lot of work was done in the dairy, and now it's starting to move into beef herds. So I think in the next 10 years, they'll hopefully perfect that, if that's the right way to say it. I think as Helen says, the Bruce is a good challenge for them. It's very, very different from that dairy routine. The cows are not in the inside all the time. They're not we don't have a TMI ration in front of them all the time, and the terrain there has been a challenge, and so it's been interesting to work with them both and see how that relates and see how information we get through boluses. The bunker feeding once a day, sends the ruminations all over the place and things like that, and that's fine. You've just got to know how that then relates to your cows. And it's a very different how it relates to Bruce's cows compared to how it relates to Holstein inside. So it's there's an ongoing learning process there, and so I think that over the next 5-10 years that will just get better, and we'll know, right, this is a suckler cow now, and we'll have different parameters than what you would for a dairy cow. So I would hope the technology does just get better. Maybe it'll get cheaper because then we'll get onto more farms. Helen's laughing. That cost benefit thing is just a different calculation on every farm, and every farm will come up with a different level of where the cost is worth it. So it'll be fun to see it go into more farms and just get more and more information as we go on.
And in fairness, like that's just how technological development goes. A Tesla was a ludicrous fee 10 years ago. Now it's becoming more affordable. That's just what happens with technology, and certainly the vision I get from smaXtec. When I did my masters, Strathclyde University approached me about looking at rumen monitoring boluses on an IoT system, Internet of Things, I think it stands for. And I looked into this quite a lot, and it wasn't right for me. It probably wasn't my sort of level of research anyway. It wasn't what I was looking for at the time, but the jump I've seen, and that was 2019 I did my masters, so that's half a decade. It's crazy having had this chat. So it's the progression's quite impressive. We tend to sort of try and draw these episodes to a close on some kind of signposting. So as always, the Monitor Farm program has a website. Just type it in, Monitor Farm Scotland, and you'll find it. I can't remember the exact URL, but it'll come up from that, I'm sure. Maybe if you're in Aberdeen, you want to check out Meadows Vets. If you're looking for a new vet, I'm sure Ewan can help. But Helen, how can people get in touch? Is it just a look on the website, or is there more to it?
That we've got a really good website which people can have a look on, and there's a wealth of information on there as well. Lots of testimonials and feedback from other customers, which I think is really important. And actually will tend to put potential customers in touch with existing ones, because I think farmers sell to farmers at the end of the day. But no, we make as many points of contact as we can. So there's we're quite active on social media, so we can be contacted via Facebook and Messenger and Instagram and stuff like that. We're very visible out there, but also our numbers are available as both sales and customer support teams. We have mobiles that people can contact us on, and very often do. And we're getting more and more customers by recommendation, which is nice, because that always means that somebody likes a product. If you like a car or whatever, and you tell your neighbor about it, they're much more likely to buy it than just listening to a salesperson. So we think that's very important, this farmer recommendation.
In a world of fantastic marketing ability, SEO, all that stuff, word of mouth is still so powerful.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
So powerful. Yeah. Helen, Ewan, thank you very much for your time.
Thank you very much.
Not at all.
Yeah, thank you.
It's been a pleasure. Thank you both for coming on. those of you listening, if you have any more questions and I've missed some, do get in touch. I'm sure we'll have. I'm sure I always do. Do get in touch with us at Monitor Farm, and we can pass you on to whether that would be Ewan or Helen or otherwise. I'm sure there will be quite a few interested listeners in this technology. So yeah, please give us a shout. As I said, today's the second last episode of this series, which is both fun and sad, but we do have more coming, as I said. The next episode, we sort of draw it to a close. We have Mary Vickers of the AHDB, and we have Bruce McConaughey, who I'm sure most of you up here in Scotland know, of QMS. And they're talking about environmental baselining, which was it's kind of one of those topics that when you hear the title, you think, oh, I know what that involves. And yeah, you're probably right. What you're thinking is probably what you're thinking about, but there's a wee bit more to it, and it was a really, really interesting episode because we filmed it yesterday by accident, the way they sort of flipped around. So that'll be the last of the series, so we'll see you in 2 weeks for the last episode of series 2, and as ever, thank you very much for listening to Field Talk, and we shall see you for the next one. See you then.
Thanks for tuning in to the Monitor Farm Scotland podcast. Don't forget to click subscribe wherever you get your podcast from for more episodes as we continue to dive into the stories from our Monitor farms. If you want to stay updated with our latest news and events, please visit the Monitor Farm Scotland website and follow us on social media for more updates and keep in the know about what our farms are getting up to. Monitor Farm Scotland is funded by Scottish Government and managed by Quality Meat Scotland and AHDB.